Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, one of the things I've enjoyed over the last 12 months is how at ease we've all become around just being human, being ourselves, being our authentic selves. For example, do you remember a few years ago there was an expert on I think it was BBC News, talking via Zoom about an important topic, and his child had wandered in through the door in the background and he didn't handle it too well, and the clip predictably went viral. But if you compare that instance to now, we're now okay if our boss has a cat or a child wandering in or a delivery driver ringing the doorbell midway through an important video call. Because no matter who you are or what your position of power might be, we all have the same struggles. And you know what? I think there's something quite cool about that. Today's guest is Michael Gooding from Akamai, and he deserves a special mention because whilst recording today's episode, he had his children home and a whole heap of building work going on. But despite the sounds of wood-cutting machines in the background, he carried on regardless and never once lost his cool. So kudos. Now, I did manage to edit most of that out through the editing process, but if you notice a slight difference in sound, that is the reason why. But today, with massive numbers of connected devices and as industries transform to deliver truly innovative services and experiences that are all connected to the web, from voice assistant devices and video streaming platforms to connected and autonomous cars. The delivery and protection of data over the internet to offer seamless experience is more critical than ever. And that's why I invited Michael onto the podcast today to explore the importance of edge computing. And Akamai is the world's largest cloud delivery platform and crucial for many companies, from gaming and mobile networks to tech firms and manufacturers. And as a result of its edge platform and content delivery network, it ensures customers and businesses are agile, fast and secure. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to London, where Michael Gooding is waiting to join us in conversation about all things edge computing. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So Michael Gooding, I live in London and I work for Akamai Technologies. What I specifically do here is I manage a global team of specialist edge computing and edge performance experts. What that means is we work with our customers to make sure that they're really getting the best performance out of our products. And we work across a range of industries, whether it's an e-commerce customer trying to improve the conversion rates they see, if they can perform better, or if it's a newspaper, performance matters for those guys too, because what they tend to find is the faster they perform, the more articles and the more engaged a user will be. So ultimately, for all of our customers, performance matters, and that's what we help our customers with. Once we finish working with our customers, we take all of that kind of field data and the challenges they're facing with the modern internet, and we feed that back into our product teams to make sure that we're staying on top of our game at Akamai.
And so much of the work that you're doing at Akamai is crucial for so many companies, from gaming and mobile networks to tech firms and manufacturers. But for people that are listening and hearing about you guys for the first time, can I ask that you set the scene and tell me a little bit more about your edge platform and content delivery network, which ultimately ensures customers and businesses are agile, fast and secure? Because I think that is so important right now and a big focus point for so many businesses. So can I ask that you set the scene on that?
Yeah, I think there's a few maybe buzzwords that we can talk about there as well. So I think you mentioned a couple of them. Is CDN is historically what we've been known as, a content delivery network. Now you're talking about cloud delivery networks, maybe edge delivery networks as well. And I think the answer is like all of the above with Akamai. Ultimately, though, what we're trying to do is combine smart delivery of content and computing as close to those end users as possible. And I think that's been the one Akamai for over 20 years, is always to get near those end users. And I believe it's estimated that we are within one hop one network hop of every internet, or sorry, 90% of all internet users in the world. So, it's testament to how we've architected our platform, and the importance we place on that. The reasons for being so close to those end users is the benefits you get from performance. You're removing latency. The closer you are to them, the less latency there is. But also from a security standpoint as well, is what we found is that by being closer to those end users, you're also in at the same time further away from your own infrastructure. So if you do have malicious actors and people trying to do things that they shouldn't, you're almost keeping them at arm's length before you even start. You get a chance to really profile them away from your infrastructure where they might be able to do some more damage.
And for many people listening, we'll have a bit of a mixture here. We'll have techies, decision makers, and business leaders. And one of the things that I try and do on the podcast is get everyone on the same page and talk about tech in a language that everyone can understand. And so just to get everyone on that same page, can you provide a brief history of edge computing? Because for many people listening, they're probably not aware that it's not new, is it?
It's not new, and I think it's one of those topics that different people have different views on. So given the breadth of your audience, a couple of things just to clarify. I think, first of all, depending on who you speak to, will depend on what their definition of edge computing is. So I think if you speak to someone who maybe manufactures mobile devices, they may feel that the mobile device becomes the edge of the internet. If you speak to someone who works for a cloud network, maybe they think that their cloud nodes are the edge of the network too. What I always like to think about, my definition of edge computing is thinking about when does a dispersed cloud network become the actual edge? And if we think about our country and the UK as an example, if you said to someone who was in Scotland that I was going to do your processing in a server based in London, I can guarantee you that Scottish person will not be classifying that as local. So the key for me is edge computing needs to be local. It needs to be near those end users and as close as possible. So I think for me personally, that's why I think I always define this as edge computing is applying logic or passing data as near to any user as near to a user that is possible. As you mentioned, it's not new. This is something that we at Akamai have been doing for 20 years or more. And if you think back to the very beginning of what we would define as edge computing, it was when you have things like basic caching algorithms. They are a form of decision making, data processing that is done near that end user. So, you could hark back to the beginning of a CDN, as the rise of edge computing. As the web has developed though over the years, I would say we've seen more and more challenges, and then CDNs trying to solve those challenges. Those challenges work. So a classic example is, the challenge around, the internet or mobile web pages being bloated with large images. In order to solve that problem, you need to make a decision about that end user. What device are they using? What browser are they using? How big should that image be? In order to do so, it makes more sense to do that at the edge of the network, right near the end user, and supply them the best image than it does. It makes more sense to do that than it does to traverse all the way back to some kind of centralized infrastructure to make that decision. So, that was an example maybe sort of 5 years ago where edge computing would be kind of standardized functions that you're then applying at the edge. And then we fast forward to where we are today, where I think the word computing has really come into its own. And it's now the ability to apply your own code, moving your services and your innovations out to the edge of the network to be run near those end users to then get the benefits that you'll see from performance and the security as well.
And something I don't think we talk about that much as well is the explosion of devices that has almost created this additional need for edge computing as well. Is that something you can expand on too?
So I think the explosion of devices and the problems that causes can be classified or broken down into three key areas. The first one I would say is humans. The second one is machines, and the third one is bandwidth. If you think about the human side of this, I don't know, Neil, how many devices you have, but I'm guessing it's probably 2, maybe 3 or 4 devices that you use for browsing the web and things like that. And each one of those devices adds its own complexity. They're different types. Some have keyboards, some don't. Some have different screen sizes, some are resolutions. The list just goes on and on. What I would say, though, is despite any of those devices you use, your expectations do not change. So when you access the web or an application, you expect it to be fast, you expect it to be safe, So because your expectations don't change, it means that content providers have to adapt and tailor their experience for you on the device that you're using to meet your expectations. And that, again, as we spoke about earlier, is where cloud computing is, or edge computing is so important at making those real-time decisions as close to the user as possible to eliminate any of that latency. So that's our first group, the human element. The second group, I would say, would be the machines themselves. So we've moved into a world where there's been an absolute explosion in connected devices. I mean, I've got so many devices now at home. I think my oven is internet connected. I think my washing machine is internet connected. It really frightens me when I go onto my Wi-Fi hub and actually look and see how many actual devices are now connected. Now, this causes its own problems because each one of those devices is either receiving data or sending data over the network, and possibly in some instances constantly. I saw an article recently by Aviva that said, I think now the average number of connected devices in a household in the UK is 10, which by my maths roughly works out that we are now outnumbered by internet connected devices by 4 to 1. So that's a problem because, as I mentioned, all of these devices have a requirement for network usage. And if you're running a centralized infrastructure, that means at some point you have to receive all of this data coming back. Or if you're trying to update those devices, you have to do that from one place. And it doesn't matter where you host that centralized infrastructure. That's going to need a large pipe to allow that data to come in and out in a speedy enough capacity, which then leads us on to our third problem, which is the bandwidth. And ultimately, that bandwidth doesn't exist at the core of the internet. There isn't that much capacity there. The capacity for the internet exists at the edge. So it all leads us back to the decision around the humans, the machines, and the bandwidth availability. It just makes perfect sense with the way in which we're using the internet today to do as much of this as close to the user where we've got that availability of bandwidth and we get the performance benefits as well.
So right in what you're saying there. You also got the number of devices right. I've got 4 devices that I use, really, depending on where I am. But I also had a look at my router recently, and I got the horror as well when I discovered there was actually, I think it was 23 devices on there. And you don't realise that everything that you buy now comes with that internet-ready connection. And if you look back, it wasn't too long ago that you probably had, 5 or 6 devices max on your home router. So it is quite scary where we're heading. But how do you think the edge will play a vital role in the delivery of that optimized content with low latency for that seamless real-time experience that we all crave and expect as standard, really, don't we?
Yeah, so I think this one goes back to what I was saying before, which is it's all about the decisions you can make at the edge to decide quickly, what is the best content to serve each individual that's coming to my website. I think what we will see is as edge computing evolves, the quality of those decisions is only going to improve, and then subsequently the experiences we have with it. A classic example here is possibly one of my most hated online features, which is the online queuing system. So you see these implemented when there are large concerts and there's ticketing services that need those services, or maybe even the release of a games console can often result in these queues coming online. Now, those features have historically been have been implemented centrally and have often been implemented because there is a central infrastructure somewhere that is becoming overwhelmed. Their goal is to just keep you engaged before they have enough resource to let you in. But ultimately, my hope is that as we see more and more take up of edge computing, we start to see processes like this move to the edge. Maybe we see a little bit more intelligence move to the edge. So rather than me just keeping you in a queue until I have spare availability, maybe I can take your order ahead of time. Maybe I can provide you real-time updates with actually what the real stock levels are. So if I suddenly get low, then maybe you decide to leave that queue. So it's things like that I'm seeing edge computing is really to start innovating on top of what we have today and kind of making the digital experiences we have a little bit more realistic than what we see in the physical world.
And one of the other reasons I invited you on the podcast today was to try and explore the cycle of technology. And by that, I mean everything from local mainframe to mini distributed to local PC to distributed cloud to local edge. Can you tell me a little bit more about that cycle of technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this boils down to ownership and responsibility. and then ultimately where we've made the decision in the past of like, where does it make sense to run and process our data securely? So as you mentioned, previously we had things like mainframe computers, and that was our only real option is everything would be done centrally. But if you think about the ownership and responsibility when we were in that world, is you owned everything. You owned the connectivity into that location. You owned the hard disks. And if something broke, you had to fix it. Then moving away from that kind of technology, we had PCs, but I don't think they've ever really given us an answer from a commercial standpoint of being able to process things. There's limited processing that can be done on a PC, and there's also big security concerns if you want to run things locally. So then we had the infrastructure, the innovation and the movement towards the cloud, and I think this added a new dimension. So in theory, key fundamentals of the cloud still existed that we had with mainframes, in that you still had to have and spin up or own your own infrastructure. The difference here is you didn't have that cost of ownership. So again, if the hard disk failed in the cloud, then that's not your responsibility. That becomes the cloud provider's responsibility to do that. So you're giving away a little bit of that ownership, and you're getting a much more seamless responsibility or ownership of that. But at the same time, you still have to have the right servers in place. You still have to decide whether you need 5 servers or 10 servers and things like that. That was cloud. Then we moved to the kind of slightly more modern world of SaaS, so software as a service, even platform as a service. And this is the next step in that evolution, where I now no longer care about the hardware. I also don't really care about how much hardware you have. So I don't disk breaks. I don't care if I need 10 servers or 30 servers. That again becomes someone else's problem that they have to manage. All I care about now is how I configure my own instance and I process and store the data. Then I think this evolution has led us as an IT community to then start looking at our applications, starting to break them down into smaller components, and then choosing the most appropriate place to run these. So that's fueled microservices architectures. And because it has become so easy to use the cloud to sort of spin up smaller instances of hardware, and I call it hardware, it's virtual hardware, I know, but it's given us that capability to do that. Now, what we see, I think we take that next step forward. We're moving to edge computing, and this is where people are taking that model further with things like functions as a service, or we're talking about serverless computing, where I really don't care about anything about this platform anymore. I don't have to worry about how many hard disks there are. I don't have to worry about where they're located. I don't have to worry about how many servers there are. I really can just use this platform, jump on it for what I need, and put my code there and run it at the place that makes the most sense. So why would I use edge computing versus a microservice I host in a cloud provider? I think in that instance, I don't have to worry about redundancy, for example. What happens at the moment with a cloud service is if my service is only used between 9 and 5 because it's a business application, does the rest of the evening it just sits there doing nothing, and I'm paying for that. Whereas now with the cloud, or the edge computing, I should say, we have that capability where as a consumer, I don't mind. I just pay for what I use, which is if this gets used 10 times or once, it doesn't matter, because that's the cost model that I'm going to follow. So again, much less responsibility, much more thought that goes into it. And hopefully, in theory, more power as well, because you're getting that instant scalability, you're getting the performance side and the security benefits of the edge provider too.
One of the big things I'm noticing this year is finally the move away from binary thinking. We're no longer talking about working from home versus working in the office. It's probably a hybrid model that works best. It's no longer AI and robots versus human employees, because they can complement each other rather than compete against each other. But on the subject of cloud versus edge, would you say that's complementary or competitive too?
I'd lean on the complementary side. Yeah. Absolutely. So right now, most companies are not in a position to move everything they have to the edge. So the cloud is going absolutely nowhere. Can smaller components of their kind of overall solution be moved? Absolutely, 100%. So as I mentioned before, this reduces that cost of ownership. And in some instances is going to give you better performance and scale. We saw one customer recently move a simple geolocation function to the edge, and they saw about 400 milliseconds improvement in performance, which, as I mentioned before, when you're talking, newspapers getting more ad revenue as a result of better performance, this has a real benefit to the companies involved too. So generally with the edge computing, what we're thinking about is, going back to that latency saving as well. So, if you have a widespread audience, you're going to see much better returns in the performance side than possibly, companies where their users are centralized in one location. And I think the final thing I'd say around edge computing as well is it also gives us the ability to do smart routing into and between clouds as well. So again, another complementary use is that, maybe up with cloud solution, I can use the logic at the edge to route that traffic depending on whatever decisions I want, whether it's cost, availability, or performance of those cloud providers, seamlessly. So my users aren't, suffering from me making decisions in one location and bouncing you around. I'm making that decision right near the end user and sending you to the best place at the back end as well.
And something else I feel I've got to bring up here is Gartner recently named you guys in their Magic Quadrant leader for the 4th year in a row. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and what that recognition means to you as a company?
So obviously we're happy. I don't feel like that needs necessarily stating, but I think the one thing from us personally is it justifies the investment that we put into constantly evolving and improving that product. The rule sets that have to go with the ever-changing threats that we see on the internet, they're always being updated, and that is, it's validation that we see that recognition that we're doing the right thing. It's great that what we can do with the size of our platform and the scale and the insights that we get is that we can feed that back into those products to make sure that they are market leading and really helping our customers with the threats that exist out on the internet today. So yeah, absolutely fantastic justification that we're doing the right thing from Gartner.
And if we dare to look a little bit further into the horizon, I appreciate you probably can't share too much of what you're doing, but what's next for you guys?
So we've got the official release coming up of our Edge KV product, which is allowing us to now put statefulness and data management into our edge computing platform. So that's exciting. I think, again, it opens up the possibility for our customers to innovate more. We're also focusing on a third-party app marketplace for that same feature, and also to continue to invest in developer enablement, the advocacy and learning, because I think what we found in the past is that we're no longer a separate company to our customers. We're a partner. We're an extension of their platform. And that's one of our key focuses right now, is to really give them the tools and the way in which they can work with them that they've come to expect.
Love that. And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about the kind of work that you're doing or keep up to speed with the developments there, what's the best way of finding you online and also contacting your team if they are left with any questions?
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So Michael Gidding, I believe there's one or two in there, but obviously the one that works at Akamai. I'm also on Twitter. So Michael_G_1981 on there as well. And then if you're interested in some of the things that my team specifically are doing, then we post a lot of content onto the developer.akamai.com website too. So we've got lots of different ways of interacting with us. I'm on all of those platforms. So feel free to reach out. Any questions?
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining me today. I think we're all linked now, especially we're spending so much time at home and linked to so many devices, and those experiences that are connected to the web, everything from voice assistant devices, video streaming platforms, and even autonomous cars. I think it's that seamless experience that is more critical than ever as we drift from device to device. So a big thank you for spending a bit of time with me today and talking through some of those scenarios. But hopefully we can do it again in the future. But thanks for joining me today.
Lovely. Thanks, Neil. Absolute pleasure.
A huge thank you to Chris for joining us on the podcast today, talking about the importance of edge computing, scalability and performance, bandwidth restrictions at the core of the internet, exponential growth of devices, and providing a brief history of edge computing. All while he was in a home of absolute chaos with builders and his family home. If he was playing Xbox at the time, I think an achievement would have unlocked at that moment, but it came out brilliantly. So thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the podcast. And as for everyone listening, were there any big takeaways from you? Did it leave you with more questions? Whatever it is, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. And most social channels, Twitter, Instagram, etc., is just at Neil C. Hughes. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. I have a great guest lined up already, so we'll do it all again. But all that's left for me to say is thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.